All right, Briana, thank you so much. We have Briana Bass, who's joining us today from Dallas, Texas. Yes?
Yes, Dallas, Texas.
And you are a board-certified clinical sexologist.
Yeah.
Tell us what that is and what you treat.
Yeah, a board-certified clinical sexologist, which no one asked me, I didn't name it. It's a funny title. It sounds silly or made up almost, a sexologist, but you just have to think there's zoologists, physiologists, geologists, all the ologists. But so I don't just rape and sexual assault to porn addiction to somebody that's going through menopause or periomenopause. I help couples get connected and things like that. Healing from any kind of trauma, like I mentioned, and then really overall, if you could sum it up most simply, it would be focusing on intimacy. So that does not necessarily mean the or art of sex. It could be a number of things, but I work with people who feel like they've lost themselves, perhaps in that particular space.
And you originally come from a corporate background, so tell us how you transitioned into this clinical space.
Yeah, corporate life, it was something I often say I'm still recovering from. So I had that classic burnout. I was very high functioning, had a lot of anxiety. I wanted to make it. And I am incredibly ambitious, don't get me wrong. But I think for a lot of ambitious people, they are very anxious. And burnout is probably not too far from them. So it can look like incredible commitment to your job, but I do wonder and want to challenge people to think about that commitment and if behind it is actually fear of failure, things like that. In the corporate world, I felt like I was betraying my authenticity. And so for those reasons, I decided to make an entire shift, but I really didn't reinvent myself. I went actually back to my original roots because doing what I do now is my roots starting from Bachelor of Science in college. So that's what I did. And COVID was a big catalyst for kind of tripling down on this particular path. Like a lot of people that were like, wait a minute, I don't think I'm doing things right, or I'm very unhappy, or all of our priorities got reshifted during COVID because maybe we were focused on living to work. And then when we thought, oh my gosh, life is so delicate, it could be taken away at any second. We're hearing about thousands of people dying on a day-to-day basis. We all had this moment of, oh my goodness, let me take a step back and reassess what my life looks like and my priorities. And I did the same thing. I've gone on to get my master's in clinical mental health since my Bachelor of Science, and then my PhD is in clinical sexology, and that's the board-certified clinical sexologist piece.
Okay. And so how long have you had this practice? Was it since COVID or before that?
Yeah, I've had the practice for just a few years. And then the corporate background was, in addition to the hard education, the first world, firsthand, boots on the ground in the field education as far as human behavior and that particular type of clientele that I often gravitate to or gravitate towards me, which is that, hey, I want more from life. I feel like I'm throwing things at it. I listen to podcasts. I have an Audible membership or things like that. I heard this thing on TikTok, but for some reason, they're still feeling stuck.
And you mentioned some of the clinical scenarios that you do see and treat. You may know that I do treat a lot of women in their midlives. And during perimenopause and menopause, libido, sex, intimacy can all be factors in a relationship. For someone, let's say a woman in their midlives, how do you approach that patient and what are the steps that you usually take with her and or their partner?
Yeah, perimenopause and menopause in general is tough. I have all the empathy and all the reverence in the world for that. And I love that you help a lot of women navigating that. Your work is incredibly important. It's absolutely critical. And that time in our life, especially as women, we're already faced with so much pressure. We're already feeling, can I keep up with the changing world? We're aging. It's difficult. So then to have these biological factors and physiological factors at play inside of us that we didn't choose, we didn't really have a say in, and we can't control, that's hard. That's really hard. And it can cause a little bit of an identity crisis too, right? So you're feeling your libido drop, or it could be vaginal dryness, or just brain fog, or a lack of sense of self, or feeling out of touch with who you typically are. So if I were to see someone who is presenting with some of those things, I'd want to talk with them about, one, psychoeducation on what I just said and filling them in on how it's normal. So let me normalize for you all the things that you're experiencing. Because I get a lot of people that say, I'm broken. I have husbands that send their wives in and say, can you fix her? But first off, let's talk about what's actually going on here. And then I also want to talk about the medical aspect as far as them consulting with an OBGYN or someone that can get the prescriptions going and do the hormonal testing and things like that. And then we also want to talk about their lifestyle, right? So what does that lifestyle look like? And outside of, let's say, sex, where else do they feel like they've lost themselves? Where else do you feel like these symptoms or potential symptoms are causing you to experience issues or unpleasantness? So we're talking about a combination of psychoeducation, normalizing things, figuring out what's going on, sifting through their symptoms, the medical aspect, and then the lifestyle aspect. And those are the first things I would start to go over with someone as we talked about perimenopause or menopause.
And so you work closely with either the primary care physician or patient's gynecologist or perhaps endocrinologist. So it sounds like it's a multifactorial approach that you take, because obviously there's an imbalance in the hormones, which can obviously impact a woman during this time. Where do you see therapy and lifestyle? How do you incorporate that into the treatment of your patients?
When I talk about lifestyle, I'm talking about things like sleep, diet, physical activity, their community. So do they have interests and hobbies? Their partner, if they're in a relationship, and if they're not, do they desire to be? So it's also about isolation, and that sort of goes to the community piece of it, or withdrawal. We want to look at all of these things. I call it the pie of life, and identify how's our lifestyle score in these different areas. So when we look at our sleep and we look at our physical health, then we're talking about some things after that, right? Maybe not that day, but then we're talking about physical security, physical insecurity. How do I feel about myself, about my body, right? And then community, that can spawn a conversation about, I'm really lonely. I feel withdrawn and isolated. I don't really have a great friend group or outlets I feel like I can confide in and things like that, which we all have come to learn over the last 5-10 years that is, they call it the new smoking is loneliness, right? So we want to definitely talk about community, and then the sleep and what we're eating and that kind of thing. But also the partnership piece. If we're in a relationship, it's very possible that they feel like that relationship is toxic or causing them a lot of pain and a lot of distress. And then combine that with someone who, let's say, is facing something like menopause. Oh my goodness, what a storm that this woman is going through, where she also doesn't feel like in her home she's getting the support she needs or feels safe to say, hey, this is actually where I'm at in life and this is what I'm experiencing. So when I talk about lifestyle, it's about 6 or 7 categories that we want to chat about. And we don't really assign a score, right? But we're like, hey, my community sucks. My community sucks because I've lost myself. So I've decided just to stay home most nights. I don't have interest in hobbies. I just take care of the kids all day. Or all I do is work. And then I go home and watch TV, or I doom scroll, and then I groundhog day it and start over the next day. Common stuff, right? So I think that talking about the lifestyle and all those different categories is a fabulous framework for, okay, where do we jump off from here?
One of the things that I see in my office with women who are in this stage, perimenopause and menopause, is they often feel very down about their appearance. Perhaps it's weight gain. Perhaps it's just their body changing. Their skin becomes looser, all sorts of stuff. How do you help women with these kind of issues?
First, I think we'd identify why that's so important to them. Where does that messaging come from? And I'm not debating that it's not important, but yeah, and I can identify with them, right? If they say, I've been taught, or the world around me, society is telling me, oh my gosh, I'll be left behind. My partner won't find me sexy anymore. Maybe at the grocery store, I don't get looks anymore. Instead, I just get passed up. So those things I want to dig into. What is that emotional impact? What does it feel like to be in that skin that's a little bit more loose? What's it like to look at yourself in the mirror and to see these changes? Because it can be very painful, and it can make you have a little bit of an identity crisis and be contributing again to that pie. So the first thing would be to breathe life into the issue itself, to discuss it and to call it out, because I might be the only person that someone's able to say. It's not something that you typically say at a dinner table or even with girlfriends sometimes, right? To say, I feel horrible about myself. Also, they believe it's within their control. So there's a lot of shame and guilt. Not only do I feel horrible about myself, but I chose this. I don't do enough. I don't do what I need to do. I don't eat right, or I don't work out. So now we have shame and guilt in there, right? And we feel incredibly responsible. And it just turns into this messy kind of cycle. But yeah, first and foremost would be to address the emotions associated with that body image and that shame, and where those messages may have originated from and how they're impacting them navigating their life today and contributing into insecurity, and maybe even how they show up for their partner, or maybe even they've withdrawn from the bedroom activity because they don't feel confident. We've all been there. We've all been there where we're like, all lights off, wear a blindfold. You just feel so insecure. It changes everything, especially for a female. We're in our head so much. She's not going to enjoy that experience, probably.
No.
Yeah, I just want to dig into all the deeper layers of it and some of that soft white underbelly and ugly stuff. And then from there, from like a solution standpoint, what do they want to do? Do they want to start to put some footwork with these changes? Do they want to start to eat better, or maybe adjust the weight or something like that? But I think without that first element of the origin story and about them and how it's impacting them, I don't think that transition or that journey, if they so desire it, would be as effective if they didn't start to break down some of that stuff at the beginning. How many of our moms called us overweight or told us not to wear that or grabbed our side? I personally experienced those things. So that's what I mean when I say digging into where that messaging came from and where we started to identify that our physical appearance was directly tied to our self-worth, our ability to be loved or cared for or seen.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think women, it's often at this stage where women have the challenges on a personal level and then also professionally as well. And so they're impacted in both arenas. When we first introduced you to this podcast, I introduced you as a board-certified sexologist. But what are the common myths about sex therapy and being a sexologist? Some people can listen to that word and be like, haha, she's a sexologist. But obviously, you treat real issues and real things that pertain to human beings that can be very challenging. What are the most common myths that you see and correct in sex therapy?
Yeah, so to answer the second part about the sexologist piece and, the silly title, you're right. It actually is a quite serious profession. And there is incredible misconceptions about what I do. I rarely actually talk about sex. It's really about the organs, your relationship with it, trauma, how you interact with it. If I have somebody who's experiencing premature ejaculation or somebody that's performance anxiety, things like that, right? That's rooted in psychological symptoms. That's more than likely not actually a medical or biological presenting issue. And there's plenty of biological presenting issues as well, but that's a really common one. And there probably isn't a medical reason for that. Now, of course, we would flesh that out. And the best question for that is, when did this start? Has it always been this way? And often we can tie very quickly to some sort of life event, messaging, or something that happened where we started to experience that presenting issue. Again, to dispel the misconception, it's not really teaching about positions or things like that. I feel comfortable doing it, of course, but it's about issues around desire and sexual functioning. So concerns around how the topic of sex and sex in my life impacts me. And when we're in a relationship or seeking a relationship, this can grow legs and get bigger and become this really neon colored elephant over time. And I'll get couples in that maybe are only being intimate once a year, every 6 months, or whatever it is for them that feels off. And we want to talk about that. And it rarely does get to position kind of conversations or the really sexy stuff you might see on TV. When we strip it back, the lack of intimacy is most often about a symptom of their relationship and the woman's emotional safety, the man's emotional safety, their connection. They've grown apart, all these things. So sex is often due to neglect in ways that aren't physical touch. So that's a big misconception about it. So the world of being a board-certified clinical sexologist is much more, I think, biology and anatomical than people would think. But it applies to all of us, which is one of the reasons I went into this specialty, because there's no one that can't identify with it in some way.
Let me ask you, what inspired you to go into this? We talked a little bit about that and the realization, at least during COVID, of what's important in life. What inspired you to go into this profession?
There was a few things, and one, just being frank, was supply and demand. Living in Dallas, Texas, I didn't feel like there was a big supply, and I felt like there was a demand. I just thought, hey, just the people in my personal life and all ages, all races, incredibly diverse, have issues at some point in their life or some sort of presenting something in this space. And I didn't really hear it being talked about. It's still a little bit taboo, or not a little bit, it's still a lot of it taboo, at least in my region. Perhaps in some more northern regions or things like that, it's got a different attitude towards it. But here in Dallas, I feel confident saying it's a bit taboo. And so I felt like there was a space, a gap, and a need in the market to discuss these things. And I wanted to go about it in a way that wasn't intimidating, right? Like, I want to be approachable, easy to talk to, all of this, instead of it having that OBGYN or that white office that you sit on the crinkly piece of paper kind of feeling. So those were some of the reasons why I chose this in particular.
Let me ask you, what do you find is taboo in this profession, at least in Texas or in Dallas?
Gosh, just the topic of sex in general is very taboo. People don't want to talk about it. What I have been so surprised to find is that people will talk to me about it, of course, in session, that's why they're there, but will not with their partner. And when I ask somebody often, how do you feel like your communication is with your partner? What do you think about that? What are your thoughts on it? A lot of times they'll say, phenomenal. It's excellent. We talk about everything. And very commonly when we get to the topic of sex, they actually end up saying, except for that, or I don't really talk about that. Or perhaps they have a homework assignment or something we've agreed on that might benefit them to go home and discuss. And they'll report back that, like, when it came to jump off that ledge, they couldn't do it. And the fact that they felt like it was a ledge to begin with. So not only is it taboo societally about sex and it existing, it also seems to be within even these really intimate bubbles. It still carries a little bit of this scariness. Yeah, I think the female might be worried about the guy feeling insecure. Now that she's introducing this, I think they're also afraid that if I talk about it, now I'm making it worse, because we don't necessarily know where to go with this. We don't know the solution. So now if I talk about it, I've just made things more awkward. That also, I think, kind of fuels the resistance to dig into these details. The other thing would be, right, when I'm working with men, that's a difficult position to be in, to come in and say, I am afraid, I have performance anxiety, I am experiencing this. That goes against everything we've been teaching males forever in the media, right? Which is to be strong, solid, don't fail. And so for a man to feel like at this ultimate test in the bedroom, he's, quote, failing or isn't performing how he feels he should be, yeah, that's for sure going to be considered taboo to talk about. Probably something that they're keeping incredibly private.
Yeah. Are most of your clients self-referrals? Are they more men versus women? Or do you get your referrals from other clinicians?
I would say they are self-referrals, and that it's about 50-50 split between men and women, surprisingly. Yeah, I'd say it's about a 50-50 split.
Okay.
And I didn't answer you earlier on the myths on sex therapy. Yes. I didn't know if you wanted me to answer, because that was... So with the myths, not in sex therapy, the myths in sex, that some of the stuff is that newness, novelty, it always needs to be passionate, it always needs to be fiery. That's a big myth. The 10-year sex is not happening based on something really spicy and exciting, likely. That is being based on the small moments on a day-to-day basis that your partner makes you feel seen or heard or protected or cared for. So at first, that chemistry, that spark is a lot of fun and great. But what sustains, what creates consistency over time from the bedroom side of things is not the things in the beginning that contribute to it, which is really confusing and really surprising. Another thing that's a myth is that performance equals intimacy. So the better positions, or I'm lasting longer, or if you think of that stuff, maybe more so on the male side, she also feels like maybe I've got to perform in a way. That, if I could just zap everybody's performance and say, stop doing that, I think that everybody could benefit. And then we all know the one about watching porn and trying to make that translate. Big myth that performance, some of the most sugar-free, vanilla, simple stuff, right, can be equally, if not better, than that other thing. Try not to chase that. as an attempt to create a better bedroom life. And instead, I would invite you to focus on more of the psychological items, which is getting closer to your partner, investing in your partner, caring, showing up in the way, speaking their love languages, the other forms of intimacy, and see actually if that moves the needle a little bit more.
Of course. You had mentioned something about people feeling in a disconnected state, perhaps lonely. They're focused on their kids, their family, and perhaps they have lost touch with their friends or society in general. And that is compounding on the loneliness. For our listeners who are wondering, how can I be connected again? What do you recommend to your patients so that they don't feel so lonely and shut down?
Sure. And I just want to clarify, when you say feel connected again, do you mean to their partner?
Both to their partner and then to the world, because I think women, at least, sometimes feel that their husbands or partners need to provide them everything. That psychological connection, they need to understand everything. And when they don't, they often feel like, okay, I don't have anyone. And if that connection with their friends or a group of people is not there, I think there's more pressure on their partner, and that it can affect the relationship.
I agree very much. And I've spoken to this actually before. It's been a really long time. So something I talked about was that there's been this shift that I've just anecdotally observed where we see the posts that are like, I married my best friend, my entire world, my accountant, and the partner is supposed to be absolutely everything. And over time, we may isolate to be really relying on them for meeting every emotional need that we have and all those other needs as well. And we want to be really careful about that. We do want to put our eggs in multiple baskets and diversify some of those emotional needs being met. There is something very unique and specific about platonic love that, really has its place. And that needs to also be happening along while you have romantic love as well. Things like that are the community, the pie of life that we discuss. Looking at what's my personal identity without my partner? What are my interests? What are my hobbies? All of that, right? As far as helping with some of the loneliness, some of the withdrawal, one, let's go over where things sit, because I bet if you're feeling really lonely and if you're feeling withdrawn and we take a look at these things, some of those pieces are going to be barren. They're going to be empty. They're going to be gray. So one, that's a great framework for us to start at. The other piece I would say would be stabilizing stress. I cannot emphasize that enough. When we are in stress, when we are in fight or flight, when our cortisol levels are up, the whole thing is thrown out of whack. So forget even bedroom stuff, right? Like ability to communicate, your performance at work, your sense of self, your memory recall, ability to retain new information. It impacts so much. I'm all about science. I'm all about the brain. I'm not a woo kind of person. And I'm telling you, it is true what everyone preaches about stress having these incredible consequences.
Yeah.
So for someone that is facing loneliness and withdrawal, one, let's talk about your stress. Let's talk about your cortisol levels. Where are we getting the stress from? And what can we do to stabilize that? And sleep as well, but that ties into the whole stress conversation. So that would be a fantastic, very tangible first step.
Yeah. That's great. I think it's something that I see in a lot of my patients, whether they're married or not, that loneliness factor. And so I think that was really useful information. We've been focused a lot on people who have a partner. For your patients who are single, especially with women, high achieving, what patterns do you see in those women, and how do you help them break the loop? Perhaps they're seeking a relationship or they feel frustrated because they're not finding the right person.
And societal shifts happen in big extreme shifts of this pendulum. And then eventually as it settles a little bit more in the middle, we're far from settling in the middle where women are like, okay, I've got to take my power back. I've got to be high functioning. I've got to make this place for myself. I've got to find my voice. And those are gorgeous things. And I love that movement. Love it. Of course I do. However, am I witnessing a lot of consequences when it comes to romantic partnerships, gender roles, so on and so forth, the loneliness, the withdrawal? As a result, perhaps, of that pendulum big swing right now? Yes, I am. So some of the things that I see are that when you have a high achieving women is really the better word. They then overfunction in the relationship. When one party overfunctions, female or male, irrelevant, but let's say for the sake of this conversation, the female, the other party in an overfunctional relationship will then underfunction. So their polarization, their dichotomy actually widens. So the more I go up, the more perhaps I'm nagging or swooping in and doing the dishes when I'm exhausted because he hasn't done them yet, the less he actually will swoop in and do those dishes. This makes no sense, right? This feels very confusing, feels counterintuitive. So one, we want to talk about how are you showing up in a relationship if you are in one or partnerships from a functional standpoint? Like, what does it look like whenever stuff isn't getting done, et cetera, or when you go to have that conflict or conversations with someone? But also for the high functioning women and the ones that are not in a relationship, right? There are some patterns that can be found commonly. One, we love to rescue, right? So we could meet that guy and be like, I can save this because that's what I do. I'm really good at keeping plates spinning, figuring stuff out. I'm great at it. So we tend to have a little bit of a rescuer mentality. And that is the antithesis for creating authentic, deep connection, because that's not really a place of authenticity. You're not faking it, but that's not you showing up as your totally raw, honest self. You've got this sort of skew to your data where it's going, okay, this isn't where I want it to be, but I can see the strategy I can implement here and the things I could change and fix. And I see these red flags, but feel like I can fix that too, or it'll be okay over time, or it'll work itself out. That's what happens when I say the rescuing mentality. Those are the conversations you have with yourself, often consciously. And so you can see how if we're starting a connection with that mentality already, like stuff is going to be not so great from the start.
Yeah. I often deal with these kind of questions. Believe it or not, though I'm an internist, I do have a lot of women who ask me these kind of questions, perhaps because I function as their therapist as well. There's such a lack of, at least in New Jersey, New York, people are scrambling for good quality therapists. So I often field a lot of these questions. And for my patients who are seeking relationships, I feel we always talk about red flags, what to watch out for, what should raise your awareness that this may not be the ideal partner. Perhaps you can educate us, maybe share some red flags that we should be looking out for in a partner, but also some green flags as well.
On the red flag piece, the ability, and they tie into each other because I'd be saying the opposite for the green flag. So maybe I'll just explain green flags. So on the green flag piece, I talk a lot about how early chemistry, it's spicy, it's passionate, it's sexy. You know, when our phone lights up and we see their name, we have a little bit of that feeling. It's intoxicating, quite literally. That is dopamine. And so be aware of that. And it's a beautiful thing, right? Our brain is doing its job of making us interested in other people and bringing us and drawing us in. So good job, brain. But the real predictors of compatibility are actually quite boring and very reliable. Reliability itself specifically, right? So for green flag pieces, it's not the most fun stuff, but after conflict, what happens, right? And is that person emotionally regulated? Emotional regulation isn't necessarily something you can train in or coach and develop someone into as far as being their romantic partner. That's going to be really hard. So literally what I mean is I'm having conflict with somebody, they're flying off the handle, okay? And you're going, this is not really productive. I feel like we could be managing this in a more thoughtful way. So that fight dies down, let's say. I could understand how someone might feel next time. I think they'll be more calm, or I'll show up really calm. They'll want to model and mirror that. It will bring this mood to this space. That's not really how emotional regulation works. So when you're seeing a lack of emotional regulation, that is a big concern. That's going to be something that party is probably going to have to work on and master on their own. You can be a part of their journey, of course, but that is a demon in there. That's a thing in their closet that they're going to have to work on. So when you've got a partner that on the opposite end is very emotionally regulated during conflict, which doesn't mean agreeing. It doesn't mean someone is just totally calm and zen. No, I just mean we're able to have productive conversations. And after that conflict dies down, you can repair that rupture, right? We take accountability for the actions, we admit our faults, and then you move forward, right? Because the conflict is inevitable. I never work with my couples and try to like avoid conflict. That's going to happen, especially when they stop seeing me. It could be 5 years from now. So it's about when the conflict is happening, how are we managing that? And then when the conflict calms down, then how do we manage that? So that's a huge part of it, is the emotional regulation. Can't stress that enough. The other things would be if your partner is curious about you. I think that's a beautiful green flag, right? This partner is genuinely interested in my inner world. They want to honestly know, what's it like in my head? What is my work life like? Or what was an experience like for me? So taking a genuine interest in that curiosity, and you can observe that in the first few months, I think is a great red flag, green flag. And I don't hear that talked about too much.
Okay. And then you have mentioned some with the red flags, but I feel like we are all imperfect in certain ways. And sometimes I think when the red flags show up, a number of us can be eager to be like, okay, done.
I'm out. I'm out. Yeah. And I agree. We got to rein it in. We're doing the pendulum thing where we're like, the women are going, we're sick of X. We're setting these boundaries high. This bar is going to be high. I'm not moving from it. And I see the beauty in this. I do wonder if we're doing that big whoop, it's just big course correct, and then maybe we'll come somewhere in the middle. But you're right. We all, especially dating older, right? A lot of us are on second marriages, third marriages, or divorce, or what have you, or they have kids. It's a lot of life before you. Yes, they're bringing to the table some history, some insecurities, absolutely some classic red flags. Back to our green flag conversation, can you hang in there with that conflict? Can you see how that goes and repair the rupture afterwards? Incredible green flag. But yes, I agree. We're getting a little bit hasty in overemphasizing our red flags as being non-negotiables and non-starters. And we've got our checklist with check boxes and all that. And maybe we want to be vigilant about some important things to us, but not necessarily use them in a way where we will stop engaging with someone or speaking to them, or even be open-minded to a second date or a third date, something like that.
So we focused a lot on perimenopausal, menopausal women who have challenges during this time. Perhaps you can also talk about other types of patients that you see that you've been able to help them with.
Sure. So other types of patients might be those experiencing PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So this is a situation where a woman experiences extreme PMS. It is not what you are accustomed to hearing about, craving chocolate or feeling a little bit irritable or a little bit out of self. This is where we're probably having suicidal ideations. We might be quitting our job during this period, when if you asked us a week later, or we were back at baseline a week later, that would be something that we feel like we would have never done. Something else might be the performance anxiety, those that are experiencing any kind of ED, and then also pelvic floor issues, and then trauma, assault. I do have a couple of porn addiction cases, or those that are in recovery from. So those are a lot of the issues.
Okay.
People are talking about and concerned about and experiencing is dating app fatigue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It feels like a loop of rejection, of measurement, this bizarre human experiment in how good am I? Well, let me see what the market says.
Yeah.
When that's not really what it's doing, but that's what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
So quite literally, if someone's reviewing you and making a decision on being even open to talking with you, not even meeting you, right? Just a chat or a message, that is going to be internalized as, okay, I now know my market value. I now know my worth. That's really scary. And absolutely, that's going to have some consequences. And I don't blame the apps. I think they're doing their job, right? They're giving us opportunities that people would not have in their everyday lives. So that's beautiful and great. We're experiencing them in a way where we are perceiving and internalizing our results as a reflection of our worth or our value. That's the problem. So I see fatigue stemming from that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that my patients do tell me about, typically the younger ones, or if they're newly divorced and they're seeking another companion, whole new world that I've never experienced before. And it's almost comparable to the work world. When you're entering, let's say, into a new job and you're a certain age and you feel like you keep getting pushed out or rejected, from certain positions perhaps because of your age. So yeah, it can be very stressful. I often guide my patients, and believe it or not, it's worked out twice where I basically ask them, what are you seeking? What is it that you're seeking? Is it that you just want a companion? You just want to have fun? Or are you looking to get married? And some of them look at me and they look embarrassed. I'm like, are you looking to get married? Because if that's the case, then you should indicate that on your dating information. And they're like, but nobody's going to pick me then. What I say is maybe the bulk of people won't pick you, but that right person who's looking for the same thing may. And there were two situations with two separate patients where they ended up getting married because of that dating app. So a lot of times I feel that we enter these things, the dating apps and dating websites, but it's often like we don't know ourselves well enough to ask, what am I seeking in this situation? And it often becomes more about acceptance, about that other person who we don't know accepting you rather than what we're looking for to begin with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's great advice for your clients because you're right. The quantity plummets, but the quality skyrockets. You know that you have someone where you're not setting yourself up for automatic or default rejection. Now this person is aware of this information. So it's not going to be a reason that they feel like you're not compatible. So yeah, I agree with you. Ultimately putting our authentic selves out there, that's what you're saying. And just having a menu in our pockets of all these other options are going to motivate anyone to hit that eject button, to not stay as long maybe when times get a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
If we didn't feel like there's a million fish in the sea and we have access to them. Yeah. There's people waiting in line if I wanted to go pursue that and put energy into that. And so for those reasons, maybe back to our conversation of I'm just not going to go on that second date or that third date, or it's been a few months and I'm going to jump ship. So that's absolutely going to have an impact on how we perceive our energy that we're investing into conflict resolution, or when things get boring, investing in those 8 forms of intimacy, things like that to keep this train going. It's going to cause people to jump. And that makes sense to me. So that's another thing that I see as far as dating app fatigue and perhaps a byproduct of having that resource.
You mentioned something, 8 forms of intimacy. Tell us about that. What is that?
Yeah, I speak a lot about the 8 forms of intimacy because they really are important for couples and relationships, and especially important whenever there's a lull, let's say, in the bedroom. So when we're experiencing a lull in physical intimacy or in the bedroom, there are 7 other forms of intimacy to carry you through those moments. And odds are they start to pour into the physical or sexual intimacy and boost that, right? So especially for women that often look to be physically intimate after they feel connected and seen and understood and nurtured and cared for, right? So these other 7 forms are not sexual at all, right? So there's physical touch, which is not sexual. So they're just maybe putting a hand on our shoulder or holding my hand in a grocery store. Then you've got spiritual connection, connecting intellectually. You're watching a show together. It's like a shared interest and kind of talking about it, gossiping about people. You take a walk together, something like that, right? But yeah, these 8 forms are very achievable. They're very realistic. They don't have to look like taking exotic trips or we're not going to Bora Bora this weekend. They can be much more simple, but investing in all of those is a smart move for any relationship, no matter the stage that you're at.
Because we often expect like it's just the physical intimacy. But as you said, there's so many other forms of intimacy that could obviously lead to that physical intimacy in the bedroom.
Therapy is not for being, or it is, but not only for being in crisis or when the relationship is to a point where you feel extremely concerned or you've got a foot and a half out the door. So therapy can be a preventative and proactive measure. It can be a health check. It can be a lot of things that are far from the house being on fire and feeling like things are in crisis. So that would be my lasting comments about the world of therapy.
Okay. And if my listeners were to look for you, can they find you?
They can find me on my website, which is just brianabass.org, one N, Briana, brianabass.org. That's the same email, briana@brianabass.org. There's a phone number on the website and all of those things. And the socials are Briana Bass Therapy, one in again. So pretty
And
simple.
are most of your patients in Dallas? Are you able to see patients who live outside of Texas, or how does that work with you?
My patients or clients are in Dallas. They can be throughout all of Texas, but I strongly prefer in-person therapy. I'm a big believer in in-person therapy. I personally feel there is a significant difference in meeting virtually versus meeting in person, just from the rapport that you're able to build, the cues that you can observe in the room, and that connectivity, feeling that emotion, that energy, all of those things I feel get a little bit compromised with virtual sessions. If that's your only option, that is way better than not going at all. So that's far superior. But if you do have the choice between the two, I personally feel that there's a significant enough of difference in your experience when you're going in person. And so that's what I choose to prioritize. But I do see people virtually. If they are in proximity to Dallas, I will strongly encourage them to come into the office.